Hi, this is Elliot from 4 Months in the Future. I am not the entirety of Queer Resources, but I do all of our film editing. So if you saw the beginning of our LGBT series back in June and July, then you may have noticed that we kind of fell off the face of the planet. That's because I got involved in shooting a documentary for my school about substance abuse and substance use. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're interested in checking out my work. It was a lot of fun, and I ended up learning a lot and getting a lot of camera experience in the process. My semester just ended a couple days ago, and so I finally just now got around to editing this video. And I hope to kick off our long-awaited Trans 101 series and finally have our long-promised binder giveaway, so stay tuned for that. Serving the LGBTQIA+ community is at the heart of what I do, and I hope to continue to use my talents to serve the QR team and you, the allies and members of the LGBT community. So, without further ado, myself and Elliot of July 2021 present to you 20 Questions Trans Edition.
Okay.
Try it out. Try trans.
Fat-free, part of a healthy breakfast.
Hi, I'm Elliot, and I use they, them pronouns.
And I'm Emiel, and I also use they, them pronouns.
Today, we're back with a continuation of our last video introducing trans identities and issues. And today, we're going to try to get through 20 questions, both commonly asked questions that people might have about trans experiences, and some personal questions that we're going to try to answer about our own experiences being trans.
So if you're wanting to hear basic definitions and terms about being transgender, you can check out our last video because today we're going to keep on rolling. Okay, so do you want to start with the first one?
Sure. So the first question is, if you're trans, does that mean anything about your sexuality?
Good question. The answer is no, not really. Gender identity and sexuality are two separate things. Gender identity is about who you know yourself to be, and sexuality is about who you're attracted to.
Yeah, so trans people can be straight, gay, bi, pan, any sexuality that cis people can be, trans people can also claim those labels.
Like, if a trans man is attracted to other men, he'd probably identify as gay, whereas if a trans woman was attracted to men, she would probably identify as straight. And second question, how do you know if you're trans?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question, and there's no definite way that you can know what your gender is, and no one can decide that for you. Some people say that they knew their gender identity when they were a small child, and for others it can take years of trying on different identities and different gender expressions to really feel like they found a label that makes them feel comfortable in their own skin. So if you think that you might be trans but you don't know if presenting as a different gender than the one that you were assigned is right for you, try it out.
Yeah, you can ask your friends to use different pronouns for you for a little while. You can also change the way you dress and the way you cut your hair.
Yeah, I know for me, the first time that I wore a binder really validated the dysphoria that I had been feeling for years, and that helped me to be confident in my identity as trans.
And for me, dressing in a masculine or feminine way, depending on how I felt each day, really helped me to feel empowered in my identity.
Yeah, so the next question is, if gender is a social construct, why is identifying as trans so important?
So yes, gender is a construct in that humans have made up what it means to be male or female, but in different cultures and different times, those labels and gender roles associated with them have been completely different. And saying gender is a social construct is acknowledging that there's no right or natural way to live out your gender.
And even though gender is a social construct, it still influences so much of our world that it's really hard to do away with gender completely. A lot of non-binary people claim the label non-binary because they're tired of gender roles and want to live outside of them as best as they can. So a trans person might claim one of the binary genders, knowing that it's a construct because it can help to describe themselves and their experiences to others as they're interacting with a heavily gendered world.
And everyone should do what makes them feel the most comfortable and validated. Like, if you don't want to label your gender at all, then you don't have to. And if you do want to label your gender because that makes you feel understood, that's also great.
Great. So the next question is, why are people trans in the first place? Like, what is the science behind being trans?
So we're not scientists here, but the short answer is that when an embryo is developing during pregnancy, its gonads, or sex organs, develop a lot earlier than the part of the brain that deals with sexual differentiation.
Right. Male and female brains actually differ slightly structurally, and scientists have found that many trans people's brain structures align more with their gender identity and not with the sex that they were assigned at birth, suggesting that sometimes a person's sex and gender develop in different and even conflicting ways.
Yeah, and that's just a natural process.
If you want to hear a more complete explanation of the science behind being trans, there's a great video from the channel ASAP Science that we'll link in the description.
So what if you're a trans person who doesn't want to medically transition?
That's fine. Not all trans people will choose to transition medically in order to feel secure in their identity as transgender.
But if you do want to medically transition, you can do as much or as little as feels right to you.
So here's a similar question. What if someone regrets transitioning?
That's a bit of a loaded question. For one thing, there are so many barriers to medically transitioning that are set up in order to prevent this problem from happening. These barriers, like needing approval from a gender therapist, are to prevent people from transitioning impulsively or making sure it's what they really want to do. And these barriers can actually be incredibly frustrating for trans people who are already really confident in their identity, but can't easily access the proper treatment for their dysphoria.
Also, a lot of people will socially transition for a long time before they consider medically transitioning. And most people have to have visits with a psychiatrist or gender specialist who will evaluate them to see if they're really ready to medically transition.
Plus, there are minimum ages that you have to be to medically transition, so trans kids aren't going to go through any irreversible surgeries or treatments before they're ready.
Yeah, so the next question is going in a different direction. How does it work if someone wants to use 2 or more sets of pronouns?
So the best thing to do is ask each person what their preferences are. But usually if a person goes by 2 sets of pronouns, they'll want you to use the pronouns that they say first the most often. So like if someone introduces themselves and says, "Hi, I'm Abby, and I use they, she pronouns," then you'll probably want to use they, them pronouns for Abby most of the time.
But it also can be really euphoric for a lot of trans people if you switch back and forth between their different pronouns.
Totally. Now, how about this one? Can you believe in God or be religious and also transgender?
Yes, you can definitely believe in God and identify as trans. Those 2 ideas are not conflicting. We're planning on doing more videos in the future about queer theology and how queer identities and experiences go along with religious beliefs, starting with Christianity specifically. But for now, yes, the Christian Bible is full of gender diversity, and if you know where to look, there is nothing wrong with being both trans and religious.
And here's one final question before we move on to talking more about some of our own personal experiences. Is being trans fun? Like, is being trans something that someone would do just for fun?
Basically, no. Like, being trans is really hard, and facing potential rejection from people and misunderstandings and being misgendered and dysphoria and like all that stuff that comes along with being trans is like really hard emotionally. I know that like depression rates among trans people is like way higher than the general population. But in the end, embracing your true identity can be really liberating and help people to live more full and like flourishing lives. So if you're not trans, like living as trans would not be a fun experience. But if you are trans, living into your true identity is going to be a much better experience than trying to just fit into the boxes that other people try to put you in.
I have heard people accuse transgender people of just transitioning for attention, But in response to that, I would say there are much better and much easier ways of getting attention than trying to transition your entire gender. And I think that it is fun to be trans. If you feel that disconnect and dysphoria already, then it is fun to live into a more fulfilled experience of your gender identity, and get to express yourself how you want to.
Yeah. So now can we switch gears again and talk about some of our personal experiences being trans?
Sounds great.
So to start off, what does being trans mean for you?
I think for me, it's about expressing myself in the many different ways I'd like to without feeling like I have to adhere to any one gender. Some days I feel more masculine and my presentation reflects that, while other days, like today, I feel more empowered when I present feminine and I get all dressed up and I do my makeup, and that doesn't necessarily denote that I am female. It just means that that is how I want to present today. And while you don't have to necessarily be transgender to wear different gendered clothes, for me, my style is fluid in the same way that my gender identity is.
Yeah, and for me, being trans is being able to live and do the activities and dress in ways that feel more like analogous with my gender identity. And so being told for a long time that I have to dress a certain way or only do certain activities or carry myself a certain way or sit a certain way because of my gender really wore down on me, especially since those weren't things that came naturally to me and weren't traits that I naturally had that I had to work really hard at. And so now that I have started presenting more aligned with my gender identity, I feel a lot more comfortable in my own skin and I don't feel as awkward and out of place.
So, do you use any other labels besides transgender to describe yourself?
Yes. So I use the label trans, and I also use the label non-binary, or more specifically, I identify as a demigender, specifically a demi-boy. So all of those fancy words just describe the way that I interact with my gender. And so being demigender means that I partially identify with, so demi-boy, partially identify with being male and masculinity, but not in every way, and I don't feel or identify as a man, and I don't identify as completely ambiguous either. Mm-hmm. And so for me, identifying as non-binary is more descriptive of my experience, and demi-boy is just a little bit more of a specific label that I use.
Like a non-binary experience of masculinity.
Yeah.
For me, I identify a lot with the labels transgender, non-binary, gender fluid. Those are labels that I have found really work for me. And it has taken a lot of trying on labels to try and figure out what my gender identity was. In college, I considered a lot about what my gender meant to me and if I was binary, like trans male, or if I was just somewhere in between. And so it's taken kind of a while to figure out that my gender is a very fluid thing that I am comfortable experiencing on all sides of the spectrum. And yeah, it's just been a journey to get to where I am now. And on to the next question, what do your pronouns mean to you?
Yeah, so I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I usually introduce myself using they, them pronouns because the way that I use he, him pronouns is very specific and particular, and I usually don't take the time to explain it to people. And so, earlier we talked about using two sets of pronouns and how it's different for each person. So for me, my pronouns reflect my gender. Not everyone's pronouns will reflect their gender identity, but for me, mine do. And so identifying as demi-boy, sort of boy, sort of not, I use they pronouns and he pronouns.
So how long have you known that you were trans?
So I have known that I didn't fit into my assigned gender for a long time, or at least kind of felt that way, but I didn't actually know or start identifying as transgender until the last year.
For me, it's been kind of a slow process of certain small realizations over the years. When I was younger, I was really dysphoric about my chest and things that made me feminine, but I never really realized that those things meant that my gender didn't align with my physical and biological sex. I just kind of pushed it away and said, we're not going to think about this right now.
Yeah.
So I would say I didn't really know that I was trans until maybe 2.5 years ago.
Nice. And how did you know that you were trans at first? How did you first start to take on that label?
It was probably junior year of college. I was sitting at work, just doing stuff on my computer, and for maybe the 15th time that week, I just general Google searched, what does it mean to be non-binary? Because at that point, I thought I was just a cisgender woman who was just really fascinated with what it means to be non-binary and how those people live. And something in my brain just clicked where I was like, a regular cisgender person who is confident in their gender identity would not just be Googling the word non-binary and what does it mean so many times. We should probably think through this. And that was when I really started to understand the parts in my life that I had been pushing away, why do I want to cut my hair short all the time? Why do I only want to wear boys' clothes or only want to buy boys' clothes? Why do I not want to shave my legs? Why do I want to wear boys' underwear? And all of these things just accumulated into me finally realizing, oh, I do not experience gender in a binary way.
Yeah. So for me, since I was younger and started maturing and going through all the adolescence growth and stuff, I knew that I was uncomfortable in my body, and it was very weird for me because all the adults would say oh, you're gonna grow out of it, you'll love having a chest someday.
Heard that one before. It never happened.
No. And so I wore a bunch of flannels, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's the sign that you're gay. And I was like, maybe. But for me, it was not about being gay. It was about layers to hide the parts of my body, hips and chest, that I didn't feel aligned with my gender. But I didn't actually realize that that's what it was until I was a freshman in college, and so I started accepting my sexuality, and then I was brave enough to open the gender can, be like, what's going on in there? And I also watched YouTube videos of people who are trans, and I was like, hey, this kind of sounds like me. And I saw people with binders on, and I was like, where did they go? This is so cool. And so
they disappeared.
They disappeared. So I saved up enough money to buy my own first binder, and that's really the moment where I was like, yes, I am trans. Because before it was a lot of questioning, but then as soon as I experienced that, whoa, where'd they go? And I stopped wearing flannels all the time. I can wear shirts with short sleeves now and feel really comfortable in my body, whereas before I didn't feel comfortable in my body. And so for me, that's how I started to realize, oh yeah, I'm probably not cisgendered female either. So our next question is, what has the process of transitioning been like for you?
Well, it's definitely not been smooth sailing. At first, I was trying to figure out if I was a trans male, trans-binary male, or what was going on. A big part of me wanted to just up and reject my femininity completely. So I was very uncomfortable with presenting feminine or being called feminine pronouns like ma'am or she, her. And I was really doing a disservice to myself personally because I do align with femininity as an aspect of my personality a lot. My favorite color is pink. That's hard to get around when, you know, you've been told all your life, boys don't like pink and only girls like pink. It was a confusing time, but it was also liberating. And I'm still going through the process of transitioning. There's still more that I want to do. I want to go on HRT for a time. But I also, maybe I want to have babies someday. I don't know. And I'm still going through the process of, how much do I want to transition and what does my transition look like from here on out? So it's still confusing. It always has been, but I'm having a hell of a time.
Yeah, so for me, transitioning hasn't been a linear process. Transitioning isn't a linear process or has a certain order. When I first started to realize that I was trans, I wasn't in a place where I could cut my hair, just because of where I was living and different things. And so my hair just kind of remained, it was about shoulder length at the time. And so I just started not parting it the same way or letting it go. I just kind of imagined that I was a surfer dude, and I might grow my hair back out. I've been considering it because I've realized that my hairstyle doesn't define my gender. So anyways, I wasn't in a place to cut my hair at first, even though that was my instinct go to, let's go start the transition. But I was able to create a really jank, safe binder. I don't recommend at home DIY binder techniques, and we will be having a video very shortly on obtaining a binder and good binder etiquette. But at the time, I was doing all that research and trying to not injure myself, but also kind of explore. And so it was kind of slow at first, and then one day I was I'm gonna go to Goodwill, I'm gonna just change out my closet, gonna start dressing the way that I want to and get rid of clothes that I never wear because they make me feel uncomfortable. And I still have a long way to go. I don't know, I think for everyone transitioning will be a little bit different, and for me that's kind of how it's gone so far.
Can you describe a favorite or a really good moment of gender euphoria?
Yeah, so the story I told earlier about the first time I wore a binder, that's probably top 10. Also just any time that someone addresses me either using they, them pronouns or sir, it doesn't happen very often. People commonly misgender me, and so whenever a stranger genders me correctly, that makes me feel really good.
Some moments that really give me euphoria are, when I do get called sir out in public, out in the streets, when people just, oh, that young lad over there. Young lad, I would say I really resonate with that. Just a little guy, that's great. There was also this one time I was on a dating app and I was talking to this person and they said, can I just say, I'm very jealous of how androgynous you look. And I was blown away, because there are times when I just feel oh man, I don't look like I want to today. This sucks. Everybody think I'm just a girl. But that one comment was wow, and that made me just feel really good. That wasn't very eloquently put.
No,
but
that was fabulous. I related to that so much.
There is this one pair of joggers that I have that just hide my hips completely, and every time I wear them at work, it's constant sir, and I'm that's it. That's the one. Also, when I dress up like a little Edwardian lad, just a fop, that's one of my favorite looks. So, the real question, who is your favorite trans celebrity?
Okay, so my favorite trans celebrity, at least at the moment, is definitely Elliot Page. Just to clarify things, I started going by Elliot first, okay? Elliot Page probably copied me.
Yeah,
but for real, he's like, he's really cool. I just watched Inception. You can't judge me for this, but I just watched Inception for the first time this week. And I loved it. Like, I know people have talked about it before, but I never actually watched it until this week. And Elliot was, like, rocking it in that movie. He is, like, super cool, and I loved, like, the photo shoot and, like, all the pictures that he first released when he came out. Like, just, like, so beautiful to see him living his best life post-op surgery and just looking so good.
I would have to say that my top three, it's the triumvirate of trans women, like philosophers and video essayists on YouTube. It's Kat Black, ContraPoints, and Abigail Thorne. I love all of them. They're incredible speakers, and they've informed so much of my own philosophies and like thoughts on what it means to be trans.
Yeah.
I love them. I could literally gush about them forever. But who are your favorite trans YouTubers specifically?
I really like Jamie Dodger. He puts out incredible videos, very well researched. I know when all of the things happened last year with J.K. Rowling, he put out just like such an eloquent, well-researched video that helped me to be more informed and get really passionate about trans bathrooms and different things like that. He's also just like really cheery and friendly and seems like a really approachable guy, so I love watching his like funny videos too. Another one that is really good is Uppercase Chase. He does some really good videos reviewing different FTM, female to male, transitionary apparel, different things, so like binders and packers and different things. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I would definitely check him out. He has just so much knowledge and experience with all of those different products in that little niche of being trans. Yeah, and we'll put some links in the description to our like top 5 YouTubers who are trans, so you can go and check out their pages after this video.
What is something you wish you would have known when you first started exploring your gender identity?
I wish that from a young age I had known that it was okay to question gender and it was okay to like move around and change my mind and try out different presentations. I know from just like my experience, I've mostly been told that there's like one way for people to present and it has to be based on the sex that they were assigned at birth. So I wish that I would have known that that's not the case, and that just like basically that trans identities are valid, and that you don't have to know right away that you're trans either.
I suppose I wish I would have known that I don't have to cast off my femininity completely. It's still a part of who I am, and to reject all of that would just make me a sadder person, and I don't want that for myself. I want to explore the entirety of the spectrum of my gender. If you could say one thing to someone who's exploring their gender identity and who thinks they might be trans, what would that one thing be?
I think I would say that you shouldn't be like anxious to figure it out like all at once. You're not going to figure it out watching YouTube videos at 2 a.m. That's probably not going to happen. So be sure that you're taking care of yourself in this process. Make sure that you're not pushing yourself into more boxes to try to avoid other boxes. You can take your time with your gender. And the second thing is that I would say don't be afraid to try out different things, like maybe a new name or different pronouns. I know for me, I was like really afraid to make that step because that was like all the thinking before that had been like just with me and with like very close friends, but like changing my pronouns was a more public thing. But I would say you don't have to be afraid of that. Either it will work for you and that's like wonderful, or it won't, and that's okay too. Like no one is going to give you no one should give you a hard time about changing and figuring yourself out, because it's a long process, and that's okay. And the most important thing is that you listen to yourself along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we made it through all 20 questions. Emiel, how does it feel?
I'm tired.
Yeah. We hope that you were able to learn something along the way.
Yeah, let us know if you related to any of the experiences we talked about today, and if there are any more questions you'd like for us to answer.
Yeah, Emiel, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you guys at home for watching.
Yeah, you can follow us at Instagram at Queer Resources, and look out for the series we're going to be doing after this one. It's going to be all about trans issues and experiences.
Yeah, and look out for the binder giveaway that we're going to be doing in that series. But for now, we'll see you next week when we move on to the Q of LGBTQIA+, which stands for queer and questioning.